In the summer of 1990, the Middle East was standing on the edge of disaster. Oil prices were collapsing. Governments were panicking behind closed doors. Armies were moving silently across the desert. And one man believed the entire Arab world had betrayed him. Then suddenly, before dawn on August 2nd, Iraqi tanks crossed into Kuwait. Within hours, an entire nation was falling apart. The world watched in shock. But what many people still do not understand is this. The invasion of Kuwait did not happen overnight. It was not a random act. It was a result of years of anger, debt, secret political tension, oil wars, failed diplomacy, and dangerous miscalculations that slowly pushed the Middle East toward catastrophe. And behind the headlines was a terrifying reality few discuss today. At one point, leaders across the world feared this conflict could trigger a massive regional war involving Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, Syria, and even the United States and Soviet Union. Some feared World War III could begin in the deserts of the Gulf. This is the hidden story behind the war that nearly destroyed the Middle East. The real reasons Iraq invaded Kuwait. The secret tensions rarely explained in modern media. And the devastating consequences that changed the Middle East forever. To understand why Iraq invaded Kuwait, you must first understand the condition Iraq was in after the Iran-Iraq War. For 8 brutal years, Iraq fought Iran in one of the deadliest wars in modern history. Entire cities were destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died. Chemical weapons were used. The economy collapsed under the pressure of endless war spending. When the conflict finally ended in 1988, Iraq looked powerful from the outside. Its military was huge. Its weapons stockpile was enormous. And Saddam Hussein presented himself as the defender of the Arab world. But internally, Iraq was in deep crisis. The country owed billions of dollars to neighboring Gulf countries, especially Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Iraq's infrastructure was damaged. Its economy was suffocating. Its people were exhausted. And Saddam Hussein believed Iraq deserved help, not punishment. From Baghdad's perspective, Iraq had sacrificed blood to stop the spread of Iran's Islamic Revolution across the Arab world. Saddam believed Gulf monarchies should reward Iraq for protecting them during the war. Instead, Iraq was left drowning in debt. That anger became one of the first major sparks leading toward invasion. If there was one central factor behind the invasion of Kuwait, it was oil. Not ideology, not religion, not nationalism alone. Oil. After the Iran-Iraq War, Iraq desperately needed oil profits to rebuild its economy. The country needed high oil prices to survive. But during the late 1980s, Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates increased oil production beyond OPEC limits. This caused global oil prices to fall sharply. For wealthy Gulf monarchies, lower oil prices were painful but manageable. For Iraq, it was catastrophic. Every drop in oil prices meant Iraq lost billions of dollars in revenue. Factories could not recover. Infrastructure rebuilding slowed. Debt payments became impossible. Public frustration grew. Saddam Hussein became convinced Kuwait was intentionally damaging Iraq economically. Inside Iraqi media, Kuwait was increasingly portrayed as selfish and greedy. Baghdad accused Kuwait of waging an economic war against Iraq. But tensions became even worse because of one explosive accusation. Iraq claimed Kuwait was stealing oil from the Rumaila oil field near the Iraq-Kuwait border through slant drilling. Whether fully true or not, the accusation inflamed Iraqi nationalism. To Saddam, this was not just about economics anymore. It became about humiliation. He believed Iraq was being weakened, disrespected, and exploited immediately after sacrificing hundreds of thousands of lives during the war with Iran. And that belief pushed Saddam closer to military action. Another major factor rarely discussed deeply is Saddam Hussein's psychology after the Iran-Iraq War. Saddam no longer saw himself as just Iraq's leader. He increasingly viewed himself as the future leader of the Arab world. The war against Iran had strengthened his confidence and his ego. He believed Iraq possessed the strongest Arab military in the region. He believed Gulf states depended on Iraq for protection, and he believed fear gave him power. Over time, Saddam became convinced that pressure, intimidation, and military threats could force Kuwait into submission. At first, he likely hoped Kuwait would surrender economically without invasion. But as negotiations failed, his rhetoric became more aggressive. The crisis transformed from a financial dispute into a test of prestige and dominance. And for Saddam Hussein, backing down became almost impossible. One of the most controversial moments before the invasion happened in July 1990. Just days before Iraqi troops crossed the border, Saddam Hussein met with U.S. Ambassador April Glaspie in Baghdad. During the conversation, Glaspie reportedly stated that the United States had no opinion on Arab-Arab conflicts, including Iraq's dispute with Kuwait. That statement became historically infamous because many historians believe Saddam misunderstood America's position. He may have interpreted the message as a sign that Washington would not intervene militarily if Iraq moved against Kuwait. If true, this was one of the biggest diplomatic miscalculations in modern Middle Eastern history. Saddam believed the international response would be limited. He thought the world would condemn Iraq verbally, but eventually accept reality. He was disastrously wrong. On August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait. The attack happened with shocking speed. Thousands of Iraqi troops crossed the border before sunrise. Tanks rolled toward Kuwait City. Military bases were overwhelmed. Communication systems collapsed. The Kuwaiti military was unable to stop the invasion. Within hours, panic spread across the region. The Kuwaiti royal family fled, and Saddam Hussein announced Kuwait was effectively part of Iraq. The world immediately understood the danger. If Iraq controlled Kuwait's oil reserves, Saddam would gain enormous power over global energy markets. And many feared Saudi Arabia might become the next target. That possibility terrified the international community, because if Iraq dominated both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, Saddam Hussein could potentially control a massive percentage of the world's oil supply. The balance of power in the Middle East would completely change. Many people simplify the Gulf War as America defending Kuwait, but the real reasons were much bigger. The United States feared several dangerous possibilities. First, Iraq controlling too much global oil. Second, the collapse of stability in the Gulf region. Third, the rise of Saddam Hussein as the dominant power in the Middle East. And fourth, the fear that other nations might begin invading weaker neighbors if Iraq succeeded without consequences. President George H.W. Bush quickly assembled a massive international coalition. Countries from Europe, the Middle East, and beyond joined the operation. Even Arab nations such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Syria supported military action against Iraq. This was extremely unusual because despite divisions and rivalries, many governments feared Saddam Hussein more than they feared cooperation with the United States. One of the scariest realities of the Gulf War was how close it came to expanding beyond Kuwait. Saddam Hussein launched Scud missiles toward Israel during the conflict. This was a strategic move. He hoped Israel would retaliate. If Israel entered the war directly, many Arab governments might withdraw support from the American-led coalition due to public anger. For weeks, the situation became incredibly tense. The United States pressured Israel not to respond militarily. Behind closed doors, leaders feared one wrong move could ignite a much larger regional war. There were also fears Iraq might use chemical weapons. Citizens across the Middle East prepared for worst-case scenarios. Gas masks became symbols of fear during the conflict. Millions genuinely believed the region was heading toward catastrophe. In January 1991, coalition forces launched Operation Desert Storm. The air campaign was overwhelming. Coalition aircraft destroyed Iraqi radar systems, military bases, communication centers, and supply lines. Then came the ground invasion, and Iraq's military collapsed far faster than many expected. Despite its enormous size, the Iraqi army struggled against advanced coalition technology and air superiority. Within days, Iraqi forces were retreating from Kuwait. But the retreat itself produced some of the war's darkest moments. As Iraqi troops withdrew from Kuwait, coalition aircraft attacked massive military convoys heading back toward Iraq. The destruction became known worldwide as the Highway of Death. Burned vehicles stretched across the desert for miles. Destroyed tanks and trucks filled the roads. The images shocked the world. Supporters argued the attacks were necessary to stop Iraqi forces from regrouping. Critics believed the destruction became excessive. Even today, the event remains controversial. But psychologically, the message was clear. The United States and its allies had demonstrated military dominance on a terrifying scale. Although Iraq was expelled from Kuwait, the war's consequences did not end in 1991. In many ways, the region became even more unstable afterward. Iraq suffered massive sanctions that crippled its economy for years. Poverty increased. Infrastructure deteriorated. Millions of civilians suffered. At the same time, American military presence in the Gulf expanded dramatically. And this would later fuel anti-American anger across parts of the Middle East. Some extremist groups later used the Gulf War and foreign military presence as propaganda tools. Meanwhile, Saddam Hussein remained in power despite defeat. Internal uprisings erupted inside Iraq. Shiite rebellions spread in the south. Kurdish uprisings intensified in the north. The country entered years of chaos and suffering. And many historians believe the Gulf War planted the foundations for future conflicts, including the 2003 Iraq War. This question still haunts historians today. Could diplomacy have solved Iraq's economic crisis? Could Kuwait and Iraq have reached an oil agreement? Did Saddam misread American intentions? Or did global powers underestimate how desperate Iraq had become after the Iran-Iraq War? The truth is complicated, but one fact is undeniable. The invasion was not caused by a single reason. It was the result of multiple pressures exploding at the same time. Economic collapse, oil disputes, debt crises, political ego, regional rivalry, military ambition, diplomatic failure, and fear. Together, they created a perfect storm. One of the most important questions in the entire Gulf War is simple. Why did Saddam Hussein believe he could actually get away with invading Kuwait? The answer lies in a dangerous combination of confidence, desperation, and political miscalculation. By 1990, Saddam had survived 8 years of brutal war against Iran. Despite enormous losses, he remained in power. Inside Iraq, this survival strengthened the image that Saddam was untouchable. He believed Iraq possessed one of the strongest armies in the Middle East. More importantly, he believed the world feared instability more than aggression. Saddam assumed many countries would protest the invasion verbally, but eventually accept it as reality. He believed the United States would avoid another major war after Vietnam. He believed Arab nations would remain divided, and he believed control of Kuwait's oil would solve Iraq's economic crisis almost instantly. But Saddam completely underestimated how much the global economy depended on Gulf oil stability. And he underestimated how far the United States was willing to go to stop him. That mistake would change Iraq forever. While military operations were unfolding, another battle was happening across television screens and newspapers around the world: the propaganda war. Iraq attempted to present the invasion as historical justice. Baghdad claimed Kuwait originally belonged to Iraq during the Ottoman era. State media described the invasion as a revolution against corruption and foreign influence. Meanwhile, Western media portrayed Saddam Hussein as the new face of global danger. Images of Iraqi troops burning oil facilities and terrified civilians spread worldwide. But one story became especially powerful. Reports emerged claiming Iraqi soldiers removed babies from incubators in Kuwaiti hospitals. The story shocked international audiences and increased support for military intervention. Years later, controversy emerged over parts of the testimony connected to the claims. Critics argued emotional media narratives played a massive role in building public support for war. The Gulf War became one of the first conflicts where media influence shaped global opinion in real time. And it showed how information itself could become a weapon. As Iraqi forces retreated from Kuwait, they carried out one of the most destructive environmental acts in modern warfare. Hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells were set on fire. Soon, massive flames rose across the desert. Black smoke covered the skies for months. Entire areas turned dark during the daytime. The fires released enormous amounts of pollution into the atmosphere. Environmental experts feared long-term global consequences. Some scientists even warned about possible climate effects from the smoke. The images became symbols of chaos and destruction. For many people watching around the world, the burning oil fields looked almost apocalyptic. It was no longer just a war. It looked like the collapse of an entire region. And economically, the damage was devastating. Kuwait's oil infrastructure suffered catastrophic losses. Billions of dollars disappeared in smoke and fire. When people talk about the Gulf War, they often focus on military technology, politics, or oil. But behind all of it were ordinary civilians. Families trapped between armies. Children growing up surrounded by fear. Cities collapsing under sanctions and instability. In Iraq, years of sanctions after the war devastated daily life. Food shortages increased. Medical supplies became limited. Hospitals struggled to function. The Iraqi population paid an enormous price long after the fighting ended. Meanwhile, thousands of soldiers on all sides carried physical and psychological trauma home with them. Many veterans later reported severe mental health struggles after the conflict. The war may have lasted only weeks militarily, but emotionally and socially, its wounds lasted decades. And those scars still remain in parts of the Middle East today. After the war, the United States dramatically increased its military presence across the Gulf region. American bases expanded. Security agreements deepened. Washington became more directly involved in Middle Eastern politics than ever before. To some governments, this provided protection. To others, it created resentment. For many extremists, the presence of foreign troops in the Arabian Peninsula became a symbol of humiliation and foreign control. This anger would later contribute to the rise of anti-American extremist movements during the 1990s and early 2000s. In this way, the Gulf War did not only reshape Iraq, it reshaped global geopolitics. And some analysts believe its consequences directly influenced future global conflicts. Despite losing the war, Saddam Hussein remained in power. This surprised many world leaders. Some expected internal collapse. Others believed military defeat would end Saddam's rule immediately. Instead, Saddam tightened his control over Iraq. Opposition movements were crushed. Fear increased across the country, but Iraq itself became weaker and more isolated than ever before. Economic sanctions severely damaged the nation's economy throughout the 1990s. Infrastructure deteriorated year after year. Electricity shortages became common. Poverty spread rapidly. And for ordinary Iraqis, daily survival became increasingly difficult. A country that once dreamed of regional dominance was now trapped in decline. One rarely discussed aspect of the Gulf War was how deeply it divided the Arab world. Some Arab governments supported the coalition against Iraq. Others quietly sympathized with Saddam Hussein. On the streets across the Middle East, public opinion was often complicated. Many people opposed the invasion of Kuwait, but at the same time, some admired Saddam for standing against Western influence. This contradiction created major political tension across the region. Governments feared protests. Media narratives became carefully controlled. And behind closed doors, Arab leaders worried the war might destabilize their own countries next. The Gulf War exposed how fragile regional unity truly was. Although the Gulf War officially ended in 1991, tension surrounding Iraq never truly disappeared. Weapons inspections continued for years. Sanctions remained. Military confrontations occasionally erupted. And Saddam Hussein remained one of the most controversial figures in global politics. Throughout the 1990s, the relationship between Iraq and the United States became increasingly hostile. Then, after the September 11th attacks in 2001, attention returned sharply toward Iraq once again. By 2003, another massive invasion would begin. And many historians believe the roots of that conflict can be traced directly back to Kuwait in 1990. The First Gulf War did not close a chapter. In many ways, it opened an entirely new era of instability. More than 3 decades later, the invasion of Kuwait remains one of the defining moments of modern Middle Eastern history. It transformed alliances, changed military strategy, reshaped oil politics, expanded foreign military influence, and permanently altered Iraq's future. But perhaps the most tragic lesson is this. The disaster was built slowly over time. Economic pressure, political pride, regional rivalry, fear, oil, miscommunication. All of these forces kept growing quietly beneath the surface until finally the entire region exploded into conflict. And once the war began, millions of lives changed forever. History often remembers wars through explosions, speeches, and military victories. But the Gulf War was more than tanks crossing borders or missiles lighting up the sky. It was the story of how desperation can become aggression, how economic crisis can become military conflict, and how political miscalculations can push entire regions toward catastrophe. Saddam Hussein believed he could solve Iraq's problems through force. Instead, the invasion triggered decades of instability that reshaped the Middle East forever. Even today, the consequences of the Gulf War can still be seen across the region. In politics, military alliances, economic struggles, and public distrust. Because some wars do not truly end when the shooting stops. They continue through the generations that survive them. And the invasion of Kuwait remains one of history's clearest warnings about what happens when power, fear, oil, and desperation collide at the same moment.